the young and the restless spoiler's shock. Kyle had prepared everything down to the last detail: the candlelit dinner, the secluded setting at the Abbott estate, and most importantly, the engagement ring that symbolized his future with Claire. In his heart, there was no doubt. Claire had become his anchor, his fresh start after the collapse of his marriage to Summer, and despite all the scars of her past and the skepticism swirling in Genoa City, Kyle saw something real in her redemption, resilience, and the possibility of a life not dictated by a legacy, but by choice. But the air around his quiet joy had begun to tighten. Whispers of disapproval were spreading across the Abbott family estate, growing into louder objections, particularly from Diane and Jack, who didn't hesitate to express their contempt in hushed, loaded conversations behind closed doors. For Jack, it was about protecting Kyle from another emotional implosion, still haunted by the fallout with Summer. But for Diane, it went deeper. To her, Claire represented chaos in disguise, a young woman with too many secrets, too much damage, and most of all, not the right pedigree or emotional stability to become an Abbott. Diane didn't trust Claire's transformation, no matter how convincing, and the idea that this woman might one day sit at her dining table, wear her family's name, or raise her grandchildren was unacceptable. She knew Kyle could be stubborn, impulsive when his heart led the way, but she also knew how deeply he craved unity within the family. So she decided that unity would only be preserved by fracture, if not Kyle's heart, then Claire's spirit. Diane didn't waste time. She cornered Claire one afternoon at the Chancellor Park Gardens, pretending to bump into her by chance, though the meeting had been calculated to the minute. Claire, though wary, didn't expect what was coming. Diane's voice was controlled, sweet at first, masking the venom that brewed underneath. But then it turned cold, sharp like ice. She didn't dance around the issue. She delivered her message with surgical precision. "You're not marrying my son." Claire blinked, stunned, trying to gather her thoughts as Diane closed the distance between them. The older woman spoke with a chilling certainty, as though her words were already reality. "Turn down his proposal. And this, you'll never be an Abbott. Not with my blessing, not with my silence. Leave before you destroy him." Claire, feeling the sting of injustice, tried to respond with reason, with dignity. She told Diane that she loved Kyle, that she had changed, that everyone deserves a second chance. But the moment she raised her voice in defiance, Diane raised her hand. The sound of the slap echoed louder than the words that came before it. Claire stumbled slightly, more shocked than hurt, but the humiliation was instant and total. Her eyes filled with tears, not from pain, but from rage and betrayal. "Why would you hit me?" she whispered, hands trembling. But Diane didn't flinch. In fact, she leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a dagger. "Because you need to remember your place. You were never meant to be one of us, and Kyle will never love you more than he loves this family." Then she turned and walked away, leaving Claire alone in the park, the red mark on her cheek already fading, but the wound in her spirit only beginning to bleed. Claire didn't tell Kyle that night. She went home, staring at her reflection in the mirror for hours, trying to decide whether love was worth this much humiliation, whether she could look into Kyle's eyes and pretend nothing happened, whether being part of a family that hated her was a future she could endure. Her entire journey since coming to Genoa City had been about reclaiming her identity, fighting back against the shadows of her past, proving to herself and others that she was more than a mistake, more than her mother's legacy or her own history of manipulation. But now, standing on the edge of a dream she thought was within reach, the harsh reminder from Diane echoed louder than anything else: "You don't belong. You never will." Diane had weaponized shame with the precision of a master manipulator, and Claire was crumbling under the weight of it. She imagined telling Kyle the truth, imagined him storming into the Abbott mansion and demanding answers, perhaps even walking away from his mother in her defense. But another voice whispered inside her. What if Diane was right? What if loving Kyle meant destroying his family? What if her presence would always be the fracture line? When Kyle showed up the next day, ring in pocket, eyes glowing with anticipation, Claire forced a smile. She tried, desperately, to maintain her composure, to not let him see the fear that had taken root inside her. But Kyle knew something was wrong. She was distant, evasive, her words rehearsed, and when he finally dropped to one knee, presenting her with the ring she'd once dreamed of, her heart broke not from joy, but from despair. She said nothing at first, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. Then, with trembling lips, she told him they needed to slow down. That maybe things were moving too fast. That maybe she wasn't ready. Kyle looked crushed, blindsided by the sudden shift, unable to process what had changed. He asked her if this was really what she wanted, or if someone had said something to her. Claire denied it, but Kyle could feel the lie. And Diane, watching from the upstairs balcony, saw it to the beginning of the end she had engineered so carefully. As the days passed, Kyle grew more suspicious. Claire avoided him, dodging questions, slipping away when things got too close. Jack noticed to not just Claire's withdrawal, but Diane's unsettling calm. It was too convenient, too perfect, and when Jack confronted Diane, she denied everything, of course. But the flicker in her eye betrayed her satisfaction. Jack began to worry, not just for Kyle, but for the family's fragile stability. Had Diane gone too far? Had she crossed a line she couldn't uncross? And if Claire eventually left, which seemed increasingly likely, would Kyle ever forgive them? Claire, meanwhile, was unraveling. Her confidence was shattered. Every step she took in the Abbott house felt like walking through a minefield. Every glance from Diane felt like a warning. And the shame of that slap, the sting of being physically rejected, haunted her day and night. She didn't want to be weak. She didn't want to surrender. But something inside her was breaking, and Diane had achieved her goal, not by brute force, but by planting doubt where love once bloomed. The engagement ring sat in Claire's drawer, unopened, untouched, a symbol of the life she might never have. And as Genoa City buzzed with gossip and speculation, only a few knew the truth that love had nearly triumphed, but fear and power had stolen its victory. Diane had made her move, and for now, it looked like she had one. But love, as always in this town, has a way of clawing back. And if Claire ever finds the strength to fight, the slap that was meant to silence her may just become the spark that reignites everything Diane tried so desperately to extinguish. Kyle hadn't meant to follow them, but something in his gut had told him to go. When Claire left the house in a hurry and Diane disappeared moments later, a storm started brewing inside him. He wasn't suspicious. Not at first, not until the soft murmurs of warning from Jack echoed in his mind, the kind that carried weight without direct accusation. Jack hadn't said much, only that Diane had seemed to composed about Claire's sudden hesitation regarding the proposal. That Diane, despite all her past promises of change, still harbored instincts that were ruthless and cold-blooded when it came to protecting what she believed was best for the Abbott name. Kyle didn't want to believe it couldn't, but the doubt had already infected his heart. So he followed quietly, keeping a distance, just enough to see them standing alone in the corner of the park. What he witnessed next shattered him. He saw the confrontation unfold like a slow-motion nightmare, his mother's face rigid with superiority, Claire trembling with restrained emotion. Words were exchanged, words he couldn't quite hear, but then Diane's hand came up and struck Claire across the face with deliberate force. The slap resounded like a gunshot in Kyle's soul. Everything inside him combusted. Rage, betrayal, heartbreak, all of it detonated at once. Before he realized what he was doing, he charged forward, his voice a roar of fury as he screamed his mother's name. And with one uncontrolled shove, he sent Diane stumbling backward onto the bench behind her. Claire gasped in horror as Diane hit the ground with a cry, and Kyle stood frozen, his chest heaving, the red haze of anger still burning in his vision. "Why?" he yelled, his voice breaking, full of disbelief and anguish. "Why would you do this to her? Why would you stoop to something so disgusting just to sabotage what we have?" His eyes locked on Diane, who was now trying to stand up, tears streaking down her cheeks not just from the fall, but from the overwhelming realization of what she had done, and worse, what Kyle had just done in response. "We love each other," he shouted again, this time at the world, at the legacy, at the twisted expectations of his family. "Is that so wrong? Is it such a threat to you that I found happiness without your approval?" His voice cracked as he turned to Claire, who stood silently, holding her face, trying not to cry, but unable to stop. He reached for her, but his hands were shaking. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "You didn't deserve that. Any of it." Diane didn't fight back. For once, the calculating, clever Diane Jenkins had nothing to say. She saw the horror in her son's eyes, not just at what she had done to Claire, but at what he had been driven to do in response. For all the manipulation she had pulled through the years, she had never imagined it would come to this. Her own son turning on her physically, emotionally, spiritually. She had thought she was protecting him, saving him from another disaster like Summer, shielding him from a woman with a dark past and questionable motives. But now, staring up at him from the ground, she knew she had destroyed something irreparable. "I'm sorry," she choked out, her voice barely audible. I didn't think, but she couldn't finish. The truth was too ugly to face, even for her. Claire was crying to now, but not just from the pain of the slap. It was everything: the shame, the fear, the realization that she might have been the reason Kyle had hurt his mother, even in a moment of righteous fury. "Kyle," she whispered, trying to pull him back from the edge, "you can't. This isn't who you are." But Kyle shook his head, staring blankly ahead, stunned by the emotional wreckage surrounding him. He didn't know who he was anymore. All he knew was that he couldn't let this stand, that he would not let anyone, even his own mother, destroy the woman he loved out of fear, jealousy, or bitterness. He helped Diane to her feet, but the gesture was mechanical, distant. "You need to leave Claire alone," he said quietly, his voice steady now, but filled with steel. "If you can't respect her, then you don't respect me. And if that's the case, maybe it's time I stopped pretending this family stands for anything other than control." Diane's face crumpled, but Kyle turned away before she could answer. He took Claire's hand and walked away from the park, from the confrontation, from the expectations of his last name, leaving behind the wreckage of a legacy he no longer knew how to carry. That night, the Abbott mansion was silent. Jack, sensing the storm, tried to intervene, but Kyle refused to speak. He packed a small bag, said nothing to anyone, and told Claire they were leaving, maybe not forever, but long enough to breathe, to heal, to step outside the weight of family guilt. Claire hesitated, torn between wanting to run and wanting to fix things, but in Kyle's eyes, she saw the truth. He needed her now, not just as a partner, but as the person who would keep him from falling apart. They checked into a small hotel just outside the city, far from the watchful eyes of the Abbott name, and for the first time in weeks, Claire slept without nightmares, not because the past had gone away, but because someone had finally chosen her, fully, unapologetically. Back at the Abbott house, Diane sat alone in the conservatory, the light from the chandelier casting long shadows across her face. She clutched an old photo of Kyle as a boy, tears falling freely now that no one was watching. She had won many battles in her life, played the game better than most, but this time, she had gone too far. The slap that was supposed to scare Claire away had instead exiled her son. Jack said nothing, only watched her from the doorway with quiet disappointment. He didn't gloat, didn't scold, just walked away, letting the silence say everything. And as the days passed, whispers spread through Genoa City. Some said Diane had finally lost her grip. Others said Kyle had snapped. But most understood the truth. Love, when tested, either breaks or forges stronger bonds. And Kyle had chosen. Whether or not it would last was another matter entirely. But for now, the lines had been drawn, and the consequences, emotional, relational, possibly permanent, would ripple through the Abbott family for months to come.